Don and Carla lived happily married for 8 years, raising 2 children, until one accidental discovery turned Don's whole life upside down. What began with a harmless recording of a night snoring revealed secrets that could destroy everything he thought was reality. My name is Don, and my wife's name is Carla. We have been married for 8.5 years and are parents to an 8-year-old son, Steve, and a 4-year-old daughter, Lori. That's correct. Carla was already pregnant when we got married, and Steve was born 6 months after our wedding. None of our friends or family seemed to mind too much that we had to get married, except for Carla's mother and father. They were, of course, very disappointed in their daughter, but made it clear that they placed the blame squarely on me. In their eyes, I was the one who led their little girl down the wrong path. I was responsible for the situation, and I had ruined all of her future opportunities. I was never the man they envisioned for their daughter, and I knew they believed she had to settle for me. How would that make you feel? It made me feel terrible. Yes, I admit I did play a role in how things turned out. I was the one who influenced certain decisions, and things progressed between us. But it's important to say that Carla was just as involved as I was. We made our choices together, and we both enjoyed the time we shared. Looking back, I don't feel ashamed of the bond we had. As far as I'm concerned, her parents can keep their opinions to themselves about who's to blame. I adore their daughter more deeply than they could ever expect from any man, and she is aware of this. However, her parents will never come to understand it. They remain fixated on her pregnancy and cannot move past it. No matter what actions I take, I won't be able to change their minds. I will remain the antagonist in their eyes until they pass away. Carla and I first met when she was a senior in high school in Chicago Heights, and I was in my 2nd year at the University of Illinois at Champaign. From the moment we met, I knew she was the one for me. We quickly became a couple and felt an immediate connection. About a month after we began dating, we became very close, and from that point, we spent a lot of time together whenever we could. After Carla finished high school, she stayed with her parents and worked as a teller at Chase Manhattan Bank. I would visit her nearly every weekend, either in Chicago Heights or Oak Lawn, where my parents lived. During my final year of college, we found out that Carla was expecting, and we decided to get married as soon as possible. We had our wedding in November, and 6 months later, in May, our son Steve was born. I received my degree 2 weeks after Steve's birth and started working in airport security at O'Hare Airport. Carla continued living with her parents until I graduated and secured a job. We had already arranged for our apartment in Des Plaines, and we moved in together the weekend after my graduation. It was a wonderful feeling to finally start our life as a family. For the following 8 years, everything was fantastic. Our careers improved, we purchased a home, Steve was growing rapidly, our marriage was strong, our intimate life was fulfilling. Lori joined the family, and both of our children flourished. We felt truly happy. There were more promotions, increased income, and greater joy. However, I should address the main reason I'm sharing this story. That period of happiness was destined to change. In reality, I experienced several very difficult months. My wife and I found ourselves in a constant struggle over who was preventing the other from getting enough sleep. I tell her that her snoring wakes me up, and she accuses me of the same. She refuses to acknowledge that she snores, yet her high-pitched, persistent snoring always manages to wake me. Once awakened, I endure her squeaky sounds for about an hour before she finally quiets down and I can drift back to sleep. I'm aware that I probably do snore occasionally, as I've caught myself doing it from time to time, and I assume she also loses sleep because of it. However, this situation feels like déjà vu with that villainous dynamic. It frustrates me that she believes it's solely my fault. It really gets under my skin. I already deal with enough negativity from her parents, and I shouldn't have to handle it from her as well. To tackle the issue, I brought a voice-activated recorder home from work and placed it on our nightstand beside the bed. I laughed and told Carla that we'd find out who actually snores. The next morning, we both woke up at the same time. After a good morning kiss, we rewound the tape and listened. As expected, my snoring was as loud as a chainsaw, and Carla pointed at me saying, "See what I have to deal with?" It didn't take long before her own snoring, distinctly squeak, 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 became audible during the pauses in my loud snores. Carla gasped and looked at me with such shock that I couldn't help but laugh. She exclaimed, "Oh my gosh, I'm terrible." We both started laughing, and she said, "Honey, we both need to work on this so we don't drive each other out of the bedroom." I agreed. Yes, you definitely need to address that squeaking. I was just happy not to be the sole culprit again. She playfully tapped my arm and said, "Sorry for blaming you entirely. I realize now that we're both responsible." I pulled her close, and we shared a warm and loving kiss and hug, enjoying some intimate moments. She didn't complain. By the time we finished, our kids were both awake, and we ended up being late for work. You can probably guess what happened next. The recorder was forgotten. It's been a few days, and she asked me to come home early to look after the kids because she has a meeting at the bank. I saw the recorder and smiled, thinking it might confirm my suspicions that she was snoring. Out of curiosity, I rewound the tape and turned on playback. At first, I listened to our conversation the next morning, but then something unexpected caught my attention. What I learned left me speechless. She cheated on me in our own house. As soon as I realized what was on the tape, I called our neighbor Judy and asked her to look after the children for a while, explaining that I had urgent business. Judy kindly agreed, and I brought the children to us, promising to be back for lunch. They were happy to spend time with Judy's children, who were about their age. Back in the bedroom, I listened to the rest of the recording. What I heard confirmed my worst fears. My wife was having an affair with another man. I was devastated by the betrayal. Throughout the recording, they had a conversation that showed how deeply the affair had dragged on. She talked to him in a way I had never heard before. It was heartbreaking to hear the truth about what had been going on behind my back for months. I realized that my whole marriage was not what I imagined it to be. The trust and love that I believed we shared has been destroyed. How could she do this to me? It was clear that she wasn't really committed to our relationship despite what I thought. I experienced a stunning mix of emotions: betrayal, anger, sadness, and disbelief. It's hard to find the right words to describe the devastation I've experienced. That one word, devastation, seems to sum up most of what I've experienced. One word captures what I wasn't: stupid. I wasn't foolish, as Carla had pointed out, and she was right. I wasn't a dim-witted person, so I knew I needed to figure out my next steps. What would happen to me and my family, to my life? The first thing I realized was that I needed to obtain a copy of the tape for safekeeping. I was certain I would need it somehow. The recorder used a dual tape system, so I set it to duplicate tape 1 onto tape 2 and made my copy. I placed that copy in a manila envelope and stored it in the trunk of my car. Regardless of what unfolded in the next few minutes, I had that tape as evidence. Next, I understood that I had to keep my knowledge concealed for the time being until I could sort things out. I rewound the tape to the end of our snoring demonstration and erased the remaining part. Then I returned the recorder to the nightstand and left the bedroom. If Carla started thinking about it, she might have an idea and try to listen to the tape to check if it had recorded her and Steve. She wouldn't hear anything and wouldn't realize that I was aware of her hidden secret. I knew I needed all the facts to decide my course of action. I thought a good starting point would be to go back to when I first met Carla and proceed from there. I had met her through one of her school friends who was dating my cousin. I realized that the best source of information would be her high school yearbooks. I went down to the basement and searched through things until I found the box containing all our high school yearbooks. I took both of our yearbooks and placed them in the trunk of my car. I returned the boxes to their original spot exactly as they were to avoid raising any suspicions. I figured that if she somehow noticed they were missing, I could always claim they were in a different box somewhere. Finally, I knew that if I saw Carla tonight, she would sense that something was terribly wrong, so I reached out to my boss for assistance. Jim and I had become close friends over the years I had worked with him, and I trusted him completely. I explained what I had discovered and asked him to cover for me for a few days, so I could investigate further and make my final decision. I requested that he arrange a trip for me to New York for a few days to attend an anti-terrorism course. This would align with courses I had taken in the past and wouldn't arouse any suspicion. Naturally, I wouldn't actually attend. I had places to go, people to meet, and a web of lies to unravel. Jim agreed to help me with the cover story, explaining that the class had come up unexpectedly and that it was something I urgently needed to do. I needed to be on a plane within the hour. I reached out to Carla on her mobile phone to inform her about the urgent trip that Jim had asked me to take. I explained that I would bring the kids over for Judy to watch and that I would quickly pack and head to the airport within minutes. I mentioned that I wasn't yet aware of all the details regarding the class, but I would update her once I found out more. Naturally, she was upset about the sudden departure, but I explained that there was nothing I could do to change it and said our goodbyes. As I hung up, I heard her say, "I love you, Don," although I didn't respond verbally. Next, I went to Judy's place and explained that I needed to make an urgent trip out of town. I assured her that Carla would arrive in about an hour to pick up the kids, if that was acceptable. She agreed. I then asked if I could take Steve and Lori home with me while I packed so I could say farewell to them, promising to bring them back when I was ready to leave. She was fine with that too, and so we set off. Recently, I've been following the news about the murder case in Wisconsin. Stephen Avery was recently released from prison after serving nearly 20 years for first-degree intimacy assault, attempted murder, and false imprisonment, crimes he did not commit. A group of students from the Benjamin M. Cardozo School of Law, working with the Innocence Project, used DNA testing to prove that he was not the perpetrator of those crimes, leading to his release. In reality, the true culprit was already in prison for another offense, and they confirmed that it was he, not Avery, who committed the crimes. Currently, he seems to be involved in a new homicide case concerning Teresa Halbach, with DNA evidence linking him to the crime. He has been indicted for first-degree intentional murder and the mutilation of a body. It's tragic for Teresa and her family, but it reminded me that I needed to obtain DNA samples from the children before leaving. When we returned home, I successfully collected saliva samples from both Steve and Lori using Q-tip swabs. My plan was to have their DNA analyzed and compared to mine to confirm that I am not their biological father. The results of these tests would be unfavorable for me, but I suppose I was already aware of the grim reality from Carla's confession on the tape. After packing enough clothes for a few days, I left the house with the kids. I took them to Judy and thanked her once again for taking care of them for the next hour on such short notice. I then drove to a hotel in Harvey, another suburb on Chicago's south side. It was distant enough from Chicago Heights to minimize the chance of encountering any of Carla's family, yet close enough to serve as a base for my investigation. After checking into the hotel, I grabbed some beer and got intoxicated. It felt like the only sensible option. Why stay up feeling the anguish and pain? Why replay it repeatedly in my mind all night while trying to sleep? I might as well get drunk and pass out. I knew I'd feel awful the next day, but that was inevitable anyway. So I simply drank until I was out. When I woke up, I indeed felt terrible. It was past 11 a.m., and I thought I might not survive until noon. My head was pounding, and my stomach was upset. so I did the only reasonable thing left. I had a couple more beers. That was probably the best decision I could have made because the next time I woke up it was 3 p.m., and I actually felt somewhat better. This time I called room service and ordered coffee and toast, which arrived shortly after. While waiting, I took a shower and changed into some clean clothes. The coffee was exactly what I needed, and I managed to eat the toast without any issues. Now, I had to figure out what to do with the rest of the day. I checked my phone for messages and found 3. The first was from Carla from the night before. She was upset that I hadn't called her when I arrived in New York and frustrated that she couldn't reach me because she didn't know where I was staying. She asked me to call her as soon as I received her message. The second message was also from Carla, but it was from earlier that morning. She was really angry with me now because I hadn't called her either last night or this morning. She was clearly annoyed, but I didn't care. I would come up with a big excuse when I actually spoke to her. I knew I needed to talk to her soon, but I decided to delay it a little longer. After all, she was already upset. How much angrier could she get? I actually laughed at that foolish thought. We all know she could get even more upset. She's a wife, after all. Jim made the third call just a few minutes after Carla had reached out. He mentioned that Carla was attractive and insisted on knowing my whereabouts and what was happening. He claimed that I owed him a lot because of all the trouble Carla caused him, and I agreed. He informed her that he wasn't sure which hotel I might be staying at, meaning he had no more details about my location than she did. Additionally, he told her that the seminar would take place at a conference center at JFK Airport and suggested she try contacting me there. As you know, airport security is highly bureaucratic. She would likely persist indefinitely and wouldn't be able to find me even if I were present. Since I wasn't there, it would be even more impossible, so I was safe until I reached out to her. I assumed I had a few hours to work on my project before she returned from work, so I sat down with my laptop and began my checklist. I documented everything I already knew. I listed the details I still needed to obtain. I reviewed her yearbook, noting every person who had written something in her junior or senior yearbooks and cross-referenced them by graduation year. I contacted her high school to inquire if they had a reunion book for her 5-year reunion. The administrative assistant was very helpful and said they had the 5-year book, but asked if I wanted a copy of the 10-year one, which would be available soon. I responded affirmatively and asked if it was accessible electronically. It was, so I provided my email address and requested that she send it to me. 5 minutes later, I had the list in hand and began matching the names from the yearbook with their married names, spouses, addresses, and phone numbers. Wow, that was a treasure trove of information. I had the most up-to-date list imaginable, and I even knew details like the names of children, pets, hobbies, favorite foods, and more for all of Carla's classmates. I also found out that Carla had updated our information, including our 2 children, and added a note saying, "Hopefully number 3 will be on the way soon." By then, I was certain Carla would be back from work, so I decided to muster the courage to call her and withstand her anger for a few minutes. I needed to get it over with eventually. Have you noticed the cynicism in my recent writing? I bet you have. It stemmed from no longer caring about her feelings. She was responsible for how I felt, and I wasn't going to mind if my sarcasm came through a bit. She would just have to deal with it. So I called her. "Dawn, where have you been? Why didn't you return my calls last night or this morning? What's going on?" I wasn't surprised at all. I anticipated she would vent her frustrations, so I allowed her to express herself before replying. I explained that when I arrived it was very late, and I didn't want to make a late-night call that might wake the children. I also mentioned that I was feeling down, so I ended up drinking a bit, and by the time I woke up it was too late to call her that morning. I had to quickly prepare everything for the upcoming days and simply didn't have the time. I informed her that I stayed at the Hilton Gardens Hotel near JFK Airport the previous night, but I could only secure a room for one night there and would need to find another hotel for the following nights. I advised her to continue calling my cell phone as the most reliable way to reach me, but I wouldn't keep it on while attending classes. I thought this would maximize the chances of not seeing her as much as possible. Realizing I needed to remain anonymous for the calls I intended to make during my stay, I decided to purchase a disposable cell phone for that specific purpose. I went to the pharmacy across the street from the hotel and bought a track phone. It was quite affordable, and there was no way to trace the number or the calls. It was ideal. By the time I finished buying the phone, it was nearly 6 p.m. I was actually feeling pretty good and starting to get hungry. On my way back to the hotel, I noticed George's Rib House and thought it would be a good idea to stop and have something to eat. Upon returning to the hotel, I began gathering information. I took Carla's senior yearbook and meticulously reviewed each page and every individual listed. I compiled a list of everyone who had written comments in her yearbook, recording each remark they made. To categorize the different types of comments, I developed a coding system. Initially, I assigned an M or FM to each person. If they seemed to be friends, I labeled them with the friend code. For girls who appeared to be part of her inner circle, I marked them as girlfriend. If it looked like someone she might have dated, or if the comment was more personal, I designated them as boyfriend. Negative comments were categorized as non-friend. Once I finished, I had a list of 40 names, consisting of approximately 30 females and 10 males. I organized the list first by gender code, and then by the other categories. In the male section, there were 5 boyfriends, 4 friends, and 1 non-friend. One of the boyfriends was Steve Wilson. I suspected he might be the antagonist, but I needed to confirm this before drawing any conclusions. I was confident I would. I believed that the non-friend, Gil Roberts, could be a valuable source of information, possibly because Carla had rejected him, or perhaps he disliked Steve. In the female section, there were 3 girlfriends, about 25 friends, and 2 non-friends. All 3 girlfriends had skipped our wedding, so I knew I would need to largely avoid them. I anticipated that a few friends might be able to provide some insights, and again, I planned to thoroughly question the non-friends. It seems people are generally more willing to share intriguing details if they don't particularly like someone. I cross-referenced my list with data from the reunion booklet, adding married names when applicable, addresses, phone numbers, spouses' names, children's names, hobbies, interests, and more. I also included occupations and places of employment where available. Not everyone had the same information, but there was a substantial amount of data. I believed that the more information I had, the easier it would be to uncover the full story about Carla and her partner. By the time I completed the list, it was just after 10 p.m., and I had reached my limit for the day. I decided to start early the next morning, hoping to finish my investigation by the end of the day. Choosing to get a good night's rest, I prepared to go to bed. As I pulled back the bed covers, my cell phone rang. I glanced at the clock and saw it was only 10:30 p.m. I knew the kids were already asleep and that she had watched the evening news and was about to go to bed herself. I picked up the phone and waited to hear her message. "Hi, Don. I figured you might call me tonight after you settled in," she said. "Well, I considered it, but the last time I reached out, things got heated, so I decided to wait and see if you wanted to talk," I responded. "I'm sorry I got upset with you earlier," she apologized. "I was just frustrated because I couldn't reach you. This whole trip feels a bit off, and I guess I'm feeling insecure. Can you forgive me?" The idea of forgiving her was something new to me. I seriously doubted that forgiveness was something I could offer easily or any time soon, but I didn't want to reveal my true feelings just yet. So I said, "I'm sure I'll move past it in a few days, don't worry about it. "That doesn't really sound like forgiveness, honey," she retorted. "Maybe I'm just a little upset myself about how I've been treated," I countered. She remained silent for a while. I wasn't sure if she realized I knew something was wrong, and honestly, it didn't matter much to me. I didn't know if she was reflecting on her actions in our marriage, but I hoped she was. After a minute, she said, "I guess I'll let you go then. Don, I'm sorry. I love you." "I'm sorry too. Good night, Carla," I replied. I heard her start to cry as she hung up the phone. I know I had a restless night, but I did manage to get some sleep. At least I wasn't disturbed by her loud snores. It made me sad to think about it, though. She was adorable when she realized her snoring was terrible. We laughed so hard about it and enjoyed a wonderful morning of intimacy. Thinking about what followed and what might never happen again broke my heart all over again, and I eventually fell asleep on my own. The following morning, I began working on my lists early. My strategy involved conducting an investigation into both myself and my wife. Using my track phone, I reached out to several female friends, impersonating Roger Moore from Homeland Security. I informed them that I was performing a background check on Don Phillips as part of his potential involvement with the Chicago Area Anti-Terrorism Task Force. I mentioned that Mr. Phillips was married to the former Carla Peterson, and that I believed they were classmates. I proceeded to ask numerous questions about Carla's high school associations, and eventually confirmed that Steve Wilson had been her boyfriend during those years. They had been together for approximately 3 years before she ended the relationship a few months after graduating from high school. I discovered that Steve still resided in Chicago Heights, was employed as a loan officer at Chase Manhattan Bank there, and had recently gone through a divorce. He had 2 sons. When I checked the reunion booklet, there he was, an exceptionally handsome man. It was clear why he was so attractive to women. I couldn't help but wish I looked as good as he did. Despite their breakup, Carla had chosen to marry me. She had given me her virginity instead of Steve's. However, she later resumed a relationship with Steve, maintained it for years, and apparently allowed him to be the father of our children. Why did she do that? Why? Why? These were questions I couldn't answer. Perhaps she holds the answers, but I'm unsure. Carla ended her relationship with Steve shortly after she and I met, but she continued to work with him at the bank until we moved to Des Plaines. Naturally, this meant they spent a lot of time together during that period. While I could understand how they might have developed a connection, the reasons behind it remained unclear. After gathering some information from mutual acquaintances, I decided to speak with someone outside of Carla's usual circle, Jill Marker. I asked Jill if there was any significant information about Carla Peterson, especially anything that might be relevant considering her husband, Don Phillip, was being evaluated for a national security position. To my surprise, Jill had a lot to say. She claimed Carla was notorious during her school years for causing drama and tension. According to Jill, Carla had a reputation for being involved in relationships that caused hurt feelings and complications for others. I asked Jill for specifics, and she mentioned a time during their sophomore year when Carla started dating Jill's then-boyfriend, Steve Wilson. While Jill acknowledged that dating someone else's boyfriend isn't illegal, she believed it reflected poorly on Carla's character. Jill felt that Carla's personal choices could become an issue in the future, especially after she married Don. Jill shared rumors suggesting that Carla and Steve may have reconnected after she started working at the bank, with Steve making various claims about their relationship, which added to Jill's concerns. Jill concluded by saying she had doubts about Don Phillips' suitability for a national security position, primarily because she believed Carla's actions could create trust issues. I was surprised by how easily the information surfaced, and also hurt to realize that many people had been aware of these rumors while I had remained in the dark. I thought it might be useful to gather more perspectives, so I contacted another person who had known Carla during those years. This person was related to Steve's ex-wife and confirmed that rumors about Carla and Steve had been circulating for some time. According to her, these rumors had even contributed to her sister's decision to end her marriage with Steve. Additionally, I spoke with a man who had known Carla in high school. He had strong feelings for her at the time, but never dated her. He mentioned that Carla had told him she cared for Steve, but had reservations about their future because of his self-centered behavior. This man shared that Carla's choices over the years had deeply affected him, as he had hoped for a different outcome in their relationship. He expressed his concerns about her future decisions, especially if Steve remained in her life. Her apparent demeanor continued to hurt me even more than I already was. It became clear to me that Carla had never intended to be faithful, seemingly planning to cuckold me even before we met. Can you imagine how sick I felt? I had nearly everything I needed from my list of names. What I required now was a bit more information about Steve, so I decided to visit the bank to see him in person. I wasn't going to reveal my identity, but I wanted to see what he looked like face to face. He was just as handsome as his photos had shown. He was considerably taller than me and clearly a major jock. It was unfortunate he was such a jerk. Otherwise, he might have been a great catch. I still had a few more calls to make and some additional errands to run before heading home, but I knew I would be back in Des Plaines by nightfall. After accomplishing all that, I returned and checked into the Candlewood Suites extended stay hotel near the airport. I contacted Carla around 8:30 p.m. and informed her that I would be back home by approximately noon the next day. I suggested she take the afternoon off so we could spend some quality time alone together. By this time, I had grown quite numb to my situation, leaving no indication for her to sense anything was amiss. I assumed she had been dishonest with me for many years, so a few lies on my part wouldn't cause too much damage. I expressed my love for her and assured her that I would see her the next day, promising that everything would turn out well. I had a restful night. The following morning, I went to my office and had an extensive discussion with Jim. He was curious about my findings, and I updated him on everything I had discovered. He handed me the overnight package from the DNA lab where I had submitted the DNA samples the day before. It had cost a little extra, but thankfully they offered expedited service for the additional fee. I was pleased that I would have the results in time to confront Carla that afternoon. I opened the envelope because I wanted Jim to be aware of the results as well. It was important to me that he was fully informed. He was both my friend and my boss, and I might need to ask him a significant favor in the future. Dear Mr. Phillips, we have analyzed all 5 samples you submitted on Wednesday, November 15th. Sample 1 is male and is a full sibling to Sample 2, who is also male. Sample 3 is male and is a full sibling to Sample 4, a female. Samples 1 and 2 are both half-brothers to Samples 3 and 4, who are brother and sister. Our findings are as follows. All 4 samples share the same father, while Samples 1 and 2 have a different mother compared to Samples 3 and 4. Sample 5 is male and has no connection to any of the other samples. Since you, Mr. Phillips, have been identified as Sample 5, there is no DNA evidence to prove that you are the biological father of any of the 4 children represented by Samples 1, 2, 3, or 4. If you need any further assistance, please feel free to reach out. Sincerely, David Rafferty, Ph.D. Accurate DNA Labs, Inc. I reached out to Steve's ex-wife and requested a meeting with her. She agreed to meet and allowed me to collect saliva samples from her 2 children. I obtained a sworn statement from her, which I kept in my briefcase, confirming that she had voluntarily provided the DNA samples of her 2 children. Before I left, Jim gave me a heartfelt hug and expressed his sympathy for what I had discovered and the struggles I was facing. He assured me that he would support me and help in any way he could. He also mentioned that he felt he needed to be cautious, joking that I might take his job away. He laughed, explaining that he had never seen such a thorough investigation completed so quickly. I found myself laughing too, even though I felt little joy otherwise. With the tape, testimonies from many of Carla's former classmates, the letter from Steve's ex-wife, the certified letter from the DNA lab, and my broken heart, I headed home to confront my wife. I entered the house shortly before midday. I took a beer from the fridge and settled into the family room to wait for Carla's return. It was just a few minutes past noon when I heard her arrive from the garage. She hurried over for a hug and a kiss, but I somewhat dodged her. She had a puzzled expression when I did so, but I anticipated things would escalate, making my avoidance relatively inconsequential. She inquired about what was bothering me, and I responded, "Would you like a beer?" She replied, "No, just tell me what's wrong." "Carla, I'm aware you've been having an affair." As she began to deny it, I raised my hand to halt her. "I don't want to hear anything from you right now. I know about your affair, and I have proof. With that in mind, why would I trust anything you say? So stop lying and admit the truth. Just sit on the sofa and let me explain how things are going to proceed. That's all you need to do right now. Don't speak, don't cry, don't deny, and don't apologize. None of that matters at this moment. Just sit and listen to me." Her complexion turned pale, and I could see fear in her eyes. I asked her once more if she wanted a beer, or at least some water, and she opted for a glass of water. I brought her a glass of water and sat down in a chair opposite her so I could look her in the eye while expressing my feelings. "Carla, I'm aware that you're having an affair. I need to tell you that I have considerable evidence to support this. Don't think I'm lying because, to be fair to you, I expect your future actions to show that I know the truth. Accepting this reality will benefit you greatly. If you believe I'm lying, you're likely to make mistakes, and you won't like the consequences. I'm leaving the house today. I'll take everything I might need for the next month and move out. Yes, I mean that for the next month I won't be living here. We'll still be husband and wife, but I won't be present." She gasped when I announced this and began to whimper, though she didn't cry openly or try to speak. "During this month there are 2 things you need to do. First, decide whether you love me and want to continue being my wife. Regardless of my decision, you need to make that choice. If you don't love me or don't want to be my wife, nothing I desire will matter. So you must decide. I don't expect that decision today either. Take the time to think it over and let me know in a month, not before. Second, you need to put in writing all the details of your betrayal of our marriage. I love the Carla I knew, the Carla I married. I have to tell you that I no longer love the Carla you've become because I don't even recognize you anymore. So every detail of your affair or affairs needs to be disclosed to me. I want to know who you've been involved with. If it was just one person, I want his name. If there were multiple, I want all their names. I need to understand why you had these affairs. What did they offer you that I didn't or couldn't? I want to know when they started, how often they happened, where they took place, what you did and said. I want to know what you gained from these affairs. I want every detail, Carla. Don't leave anything out. I need to understand who you really are. I've lost the woman I thought you were, but I need to know who you are if there's any chance of saving this marriage. Remember, Carla, I have evidence. That being said, don't leave anything out and don't even think about lying. If you lie to me, I guarantee it will be over. If you tell me every truthful detail, there's a chance we could stay together. I said a chance, no guarantees. Don't interpret it as anything more than a possibility. I could see the fear intensifying in her eyes, and I was fairly certain she understood just how serious I was and the perilous situation she was facing. If you choose that you cannot or do not want to be truthful with me, simply inform me by the end of the month, and we will end our marriage as swiftly and smoothly as possible. Right now, the decision rests entirely with you. You have all the choices to make over the next month. When you've decided whether you love me and want to remain married, please send me an email to my work address, including a written explanation of your betrayal. I expect to receive both exactly 4 weeks from today, not earlier or later. Additionally, if I discover that you continue the affair at any point in the future, our marriage will end immediately. Make sure you understand that. Regarding the children, would you like to have custody of them for the next month, or would you prefer that I take care of them? Either option is acceptable to me. If you want them, I will visit every Wednesday evening. I will pick them up from the babysitter and keep them with me until 8:30 p.m., then bring them back home. I will call you upon arrival, and you can come out to collect them so I know you've arrived. Every weekend I will take them out on one of the 2 days. You can arrange the schedule in a way that best suits you, and I will adhere to it. If you don't want the kids, I'm offering you the same schedule I initially proposed. You can pick them up from the babysitter on Wednesdays, and I will collect them here at 8:30 p.m. Additionally, you can have them on one of the 2 weekend days each week, and I'll bring them to you on the selected day. I'm going to pack some of my things now, and once I'm done, I'm leaving. Make a decision about the kids before I go. With that, I left the room and headed upstairs to the bedroom to pack a few bags. I could hear her crying downstairs while I was packing, but when I returned, she had somewhat composed herself. Her eyes were red, and there were streaks in her makeup, but she seemed to be holding it together. "Don," she began, "I know you don't want to hear this." "Stop," I shouted. "You're right, I don't want to hear it. Do as I said, or we can end this fake marriage right now." Up until that moment, I thought I had handled the situation well, but I must have overestimated her understanding of how serious this was. That realization angered me so much that I had to lash out. When I screamed, she recoiled in shock and lowered her head. "Do you want to keep the kids with you, or should I take them?" "I want them with me," she cried. "All right, I'm leaving then. I'll call you tomorrow to discuss the schedule for me to pick up the kids on Wednesdays and 1 weekend day each week. Goodbye, Carla." And with that, I left. The month flew by quickly. Every Wednesday night, I took Steve and Lori out to dinner before returning to my hotel suite. Because Lori was so young, she wasn't fully aware of what was happening, but Steve had a sense that something was going on. He asked me why I wasn't at home, and I explained that his mother and I were experiencing marital problems and were trying to work them out. I felt it was best for me to stay away for a while. I asked him to be patient and not to worry about us, assuring him that both his mother and I loved him and Lori deeply. Steve seemed content with my explanation, so I decided to leave it at that for the time being. Each time I dropped the kids off at the house, I saw Carla. She would come to the front door to greet them and ensure they safely entered the house. One time, she began to walk toward the car to talk to me, but I raised my hand to signal her to stop and drove away. As I left, I saw her crying. After that, she only stayed in the doorway. Exactly 1 month after our confrontation, I received an email from Carla. It read, "Dear Don, I want you to know that I am sorry you have been hurt so deeply. I love you, and I want to be your wife. Please call me after you read my letter and decide to come home to me. I want to spend the rest of my life married to you. I need you, and your children need you. Love, Carla." When I read her message, I realized that Carla wasn't being completely honest in her letter. I knew she wouldn't admit that Steve and Lori weren't my biological children. I already knew how I would respond even before reading the letter. Nevertheless, it was important that we actually read it. Attached to the email was this extensive letter. "Dear Don, I'm writing to you in an effort to persuade you to return home to me. I deeply love you and wish to remain your wife and grow old together. While this sentiment is straightforward, the reasons behind it are quite complex. I understand that what I'm about to share may cause you pain, which I never intended, but I believe in being completely honest with you. I have feelings for two men, you and Steve Wilson. You accused me of having an affair, and in many people's eyes that might be true. However, I didn't view it as an affair. To me, an affair is a brief infatuation leading to a short-term, illicit, romantic, or intimacy relationship. I realize this will be very hurtful, but my connection with Steve predates our relationship. As you know, I was involved with someone else before I met you, Steve Wilson. We had been dating since I was a sophomore. Steve was, and still is, a handsome, charming, witty, intelligent, and caring man. Shortly after we began dating, I realized I was in love with him. He embodied almost everything a girl could desire in a boyfriend or husband. I loved him, Don, but he had a flaw that prevented us from marrying. His good looks, charisma, and self-confidence made it clear he wouldn't remain faithful as a husband. Because of this, I loved him but knew I could never marry him, and thus I wouldn't give my virginity to him. I was steadfast in the belief that I would only share that with my husband. Although he persistently tried to persuade me, and a part of me wanted to, I refused to give in. Then I met you. In a short period, I realized I loved you, and that you were the man I wanted to marry. You are attractive, kind, gentle, intelligent, funny, and intimacy. I saw in you a man who would stay faithful throughout our marriage. You possessed all the qualities I desired in a husband, and I loved you deeply. The issue is that my love for Steve never faded. I loved both of you, differently yet similarly. It's difficult to explain, but it's the closest I can come to describing my true feelings. Steve continually tried to pursue a romantic relationship with me, but I always declined. I would see you on weekends while spending weekdays with Steve. He was aware of you and knew I also loved you, yet he could see that my love for him persisted. Once I mentioned to him that perhaps after I gave my virginity to my future husband, I might consider being with him before marriage. He gave me a strange look but didn't pursue the topic further. After we became close and I fully committed myself to you, I'm sure he noticed. He continued to pursue me, looking for an opportunity to connect with me in a way that I had initially allowed. We weren't married or even engaged at the time, though I knew you were the one I wanted to marry. Don, I made a mistake. I let Steve into my life, and I even wanted that connection with him. I cared for him in addition to caring for you, and I sought comfort in him. I became pregnant, and I knew the child wasn't yours, but I still wanted to be with you, not him. I deeply regret everything that followed. From that point on, I was unfaithful to you. I told you we were expecting a baby, and you married me, never doubting that the child was yours. Little Steve looked like me, so you had no reason to question his parentage. I didn't stop seeing Steve after we married. We continued to meet from time to time, and I stayed involved with him even though I was married to you. I cared for both of you. You were an amazing father to Steve and Lori. A woman couldn't ask for a better husband. My love for you grew stronger each day. I know this won't make up for what I've done, but my feelings for Steve didn't grow. My love for you, however, has only become deeper. For years I watched you closely, almost hoping you would make a mistake so I could feel less guilty, but you never did. You were everything I could want in a husband, and I was so grateful to have you, even though I didn't deserve you. I realize I'm stalling. I will continue and share the rest. You asked for the truth, so I will give you all the details. Who is Steve Wilson? Why? Because I had feelings for him too. Where? We met in various places. At his home, here, in public spaces. We saw each other in restaurants, parks, and sometimes in our cars. We found ways to meet whenever we could. When? I don't remember all the dates, but it was about once a month or every other month. We just made arrangements whenever possible. We were close and spent time together, We talked, shared moments, and I allowed myself to be involved with him. Steve eventually got married, but his marriage didn't last because of his behavior. He was unfaithful to his wife, as I had expected. She found out, and they divorced. He wanted me to leave you and be with him, but I refused. I told him I wouldn't divorce you because I knew he couldn't be the faithful husband you were to me. It's ironic how I expected more from you than I gave in return, and I regret that deeply. Don, I know this is a lot to hear, but I have more to say. Steve is also Lori's father, and I am pregnant again. I believe it happened the last time I was with Steve. This means all of our children share the same biological father. I thought it would be best for them to be full siblings, but Don, you are and always will be their real father. You have raised and cared for them, and Steve has never been a part of their lives. He doesn't want to be, and neither do I. I want you to be their father. I am truly sorry for everything that has happened, and I know I have caused you deep pain. If I could change things, I would. I am truly, deeply sorry. I pray that you will come back to me and give me a chance to fix things. I hope you love me enough to want to rebuild our marriage. Please come home to me. I know there are more questions you may have, and I promise I will answer them all. I'm begging you to give me one more chance. I'll be waiting for your call. With love, Carla. The following day was Friday, and I reached out to Carla, letting her know I would be home early in the morning. I suggested she take the day off and arrange for the kids to stay with a sitter because we had a lot to discuss. She agreed and asked what I was thinking. I told her she would find out the next day. After that, I ended the call. The next morning, I arrived home to find Carla waiting in the kitchen. She handed me a cup of coffee, which I accepted. I suggested we sit at the table to go over everything. Once we were seated, I opened my briefcase and laid out a stack of documents and files on the table. Carla, this is my evidence. It starts with this recording. From it, I learned a lot. You were unfaithful to me with someone named Steve. You were drawn to him and continued seeing him even before we got married. Neither of our children are biologically mine. You intended to have another child with him, so I would raise 3 of his children. You were with him before being with me. You claimed to love me, but you didn't stop seeing him. Her face looked shocked. In case you're wondering, the recording comes from a device we use to monitor snoring. I erased everything except the snoring so you wouldn't know I had discovered the truth. I didn't actually go to New York. I went to Chicago Heights to look into your past, learn about Steve, and uncover the truth about our children. That's why you couldn't find me in New York. Once I knew what you were hiding, I couldn't stay. I pulled out the high school yearbooks. I thought a good starting point was your yearbooks. I made a list of everyone who left you comments and categorized them by their relationship to you. Here's what I found. I added my list to the yearbooks and placed the reunion booklet on the table. This booklet is for your upcoming high school reunion. I used it to find current names and addresses for everyone on my list. I spoke to Jill Marker and Steve's ex-wife's sister, who knew a lot. A boy from high school who once had a crush on you also helped me. He stopped liking you after finding out you were seeing Steve behind my back. Your old friends and classmates know what you did, Carla. I can't believe you thought Steve would keep it all quiet. The next document was a letter from the DNA lab. This shows I'm not the biological father of our 2 children. I met with Steve's ex-wife, who allowed me to collect DNA samples from her 2 sons. This letter confirms that Steve and Lori are half-siblings to Steve's children. His ex-wife's statement confirms the DNA samples were collected with her consent. I have more evidence, but this is the main part. I don't need to dig for more. Receipts, traces, or further proof. I already know enough about your affair, don't I? She nodded. I don't need to hear about your relationship with him. Your letter confirms what I found out, and I appreciate your honesty, at least now. Carla, I loved you and gave my all to this marriage. I believed you did the same, and I was happy. But now I know our marriage was based on lies, and I have to face the truth. When I first found out, I wanted to lash out, to confront you. I don't feel that way anymore, but if things continue, I'll have to walk away. Throughout this period, I continuously noticed Carla's expression shifting. They transitioned from astonishment at how I uncovered these matters to sheer fear about what lay ahead for our marriage. Her reaction intensified when I admitted that I wanted to kill her. I opened the final file on the table. Carla, these are the divorce papers. I have already completed my part, and all that's left is for you to sign them. Additionally, there are documents granting me full custody of our children, including your unborn baby. Her expression changed from fear to outright panic. In that instant, I thought I saw madness in her eyes. Even though she had ruined our marriage, that look saddened me deeply. It wasn't my intention, but I felt I had no other option. I couldn't continue living with the situation she had created. Once you sign the papers, I will place them in my safe deposit box. Your future actions will determine whether I actually file them with the courts. If you comply with all my demands, I won't leave you or evict you. But we won't be living as husband and wife anytime soon. I expect you to move your belongings into the spare bedroom immediately, as I will be using the master bedroom. I expect Steve to pay child support in the amount of $2,000 per year for each child, to be deposited into a trust account until they reach 18 years old. This includes the new baby, since he has openly bragged about putting that bun in your oven. The total due now is $30,000, $16,000 for Stephen, $8,000 for Lori for past payments, and $2,000 for the upcoming year. Additionally, he must obtain a paid-up life insurance policy for $108,000 to cover these payments in case of his untimely death. The children should be listed as beneficiaries, and you should be the policy owner so you can make changes as needed. He will receive a letter stating that once his full obligation for voluntary child support is fulfilled, the policy ownership will revert to him. If he fails to meet either of these requirements, I will expose everything and sue him in court for both past and future child support. This will result in court-ordered payments being sent to his current and future employers, likely hindering his promotion opportunities, but I don't care. If he agrees to my demands but fails to uphold them in the future, his life insurance benefits will provide for his children. Interpret that as you will. Everything will be presented to him in a neatly compiled letter from my attorney, along with copies of all the evidence I have gathered to date. In my perspective, you have two choices. 1. You can leave at any moment without the children. Simply pack your belongings and walk out. You always have that freedom. 2. You can sign these documents and remain here with your children, even though we won't continue living as husband and wife. I don't understand why you would need a lawyer since your options are quite limited. However, if you insist on involving an attorney to review these documents, I will allow you until Tuesday morning next week to do so. Let me be clear. If you refuse to sign the divorce or custody agreements and attempt to leave with the children, I will find you and ensure you cannot take them away. Regardless of what happened in our marriage, I am not willing to lose our children. Neither they nor I deserve that, and I will not accept it, no exceptions. There's one more condition. You must never see or communicate with Steve again. If you do and we find out, there will be serious consequences for both of you. You have lost both me and Steve because of my insistence on this. You won't have the right to love either of us. Don't make a mistake that results in losing your children as well. That's all I have to say. So, do you want to sign these papers now, or would you prefer to consult an attorney? I could tell she was a defeated woman, and I didn't take any pleasure in it. However, given the situation she placed me in, I believed it was the only course of action. "Yes, I'll sign them now," she responded. With that, she signed both the divorce and custody papers. I placed them in my briefcase and informed her that I was heading to the bank to store them in my safe deposit box. I told her I would move back into the house on Saturday morning and expected her to be relocated to the spare bedroom by the time I arrived. I said, "Goodbye, Carla. I'll see you tomorrow." And then I left. The following day, I returned and settled in completely. As I had instructed, Carla had moved all her clothes and belongings into the spare room. Life continued as usual. Our home seemed normal on the outside. I treated her politely. We communicated regularly, shared meals, played with the children together, and laughed with them at their jokes and antics. To anyone observing, we appeared to be a typical family. However, beneath the surface, there was no sign of marital closeness. The secretive glances we once shared as husband and wife were gone. Our conversations lacked intimacy, and there was no emotional warmth between us. I neither touched her nor allowed her to touch me. Time passed us by relentlessly, sometimes overwhelming us completely. I spent countless nights lying awake, reflecting on what we had lost and wishing it could all disappear. I hoped it was just a bad dream that would fade by morning, but instead, it lingered every day. I'm certain Carla also endured many sleepless, tormenting nights. Occasionally, I would hear her crying in her room. There was one day her sobbing nearly broke me, and I would have done anything to restore her happiness. After hearing her cries several times, I would return to my bed and lie there, contemplating how I had become so cold and unfeeling. I recognized that I had changed into someone I wasn't proud of, but I no longer cared. I didn't feel her pain, and honestly, I could barely sense my own anymore. Over the next few months, Carla made multiple attempts to discuss what had happened. She wanted us to talk things through and find a way to be happy again. I bluntly told her I wasn't interested in hearing more about her betrayal, and that nothing she said could make things right. Each time I dismissed her, she would withdraw, leading to nights filled with her sobbing from her room. Meanwhile, her body was changing as her pregnancy advanced. One Friday morning, she called to tell me she was in labor. I rushed home to take her to the hospital, and 3 hours later, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. I even stayed with her in the labor and delivery rooms, holding her hand as she endured the pains of labor and the process of bringing our child into the world. Carla asked me what I wanted to name our daughter, and I suggested Grace, so we could call her Gracie. She gave me a strange look because Grace was her mother's name, and she knew I wasn't fond of her mother due to how her parents had always treated me. She then asked if I wanted Gracie's middle name to be my mother's name, Louise. That would have been nice, like in the movie Miss Congeniality. I told her I didn't want to use my mother's name and that she could choose any name she liked as long as it wasn't connected to me or my family. Her face showed shock and hurt. The new me didn't care. I simply walked away, hearing her sobs as I headed down the hallway to go home. On Saturday, I visited Gracie. She was absolutely adorable, and within minutes, she had me completely enchanted with her tiny fingers. I found myself falling in love with her. How could that happen? How could I develop feelings for another man's child? This had happened twice before with Stephen and Lori, but I didn't realize they weren't my own children. How could it happen again? I have no idea, but it did. On Sunday, I went to the hospital to pick up Carla and Gracie and bring them home. When I arrived, her parents were in Gracie's room. Grace gave me a stern look and questioned why I hadn't visited Carla on Saturday when I came to see her. I waited for Carla to defend me, but she remained silent. Looking at her, I saw a tear in her eye, and she turned away when I met her gaze. I couldn't believe she would let her mother attack me again. I was utterly disgusted and furious. I told Grace that my actions were none of her concern, and that if she wanted more information, she should ask her daughter directly. She retaliated, saying I had no right to speak to her that way since she was my wife's mother, and it was her business. Turning back to Carla, she simply looked down and averted her eyes. I knew she would react when I said, "Well, we'll just have to change that." I was correct. Her head snapped up so forcefully it seemed like her neck might break, and she finally said, "Mom and Dad, just leave it alone. I think it's time for you to go so Don can take Gracie and me home." Before leaving, her father felt the need to voice his own opinion. He said, "Listen, son, that's no way to treat your wife's parents. But I should have expected it from someone like you." I responded, "Don't ever call me son again. I have never been a son to you, and I never will be. Now leave." In the car on our way home, Carla apologized, saying, "Don, I am so sorry about that." I replied, "Why, Carla?" "They never liked me. They never showed me any respect as their son-in-law. They always thought their wonderful daughter married beneath herself." "Why apologize?" "You've also always let them hold these opinions about me. You never defended me when they criticized me. Now I understand why. It's because you never showed me any respect either. You began disrespecting me even before we were married and have continued every day since. No wonder they don't respect me." As time passed, I did many things over the next few months. In fact, I kept myself quite busy. I had Gracie undergo a DNA test, and the results confirmed that she was also Steve's child. Honestly, the test results didn't matter to me because I already knew she was his. I only wanted the results for documentation purposes. I cherished that little sweetheart as if she were my own. No father could love a child more than I did. When she gazed up at me and smiled, it warmed my heart once again. That love was established during the first few minutes of my Saturday hospital visit, and would never fade. I also spent more time with Stephen and Lori. I was the best father any child could ask for. My love for them grew each day, and I never once regretted that they were my children. Although Steve Wilson contributed half of their DNA, I was their father in every other meaningful way. Life with my children was perfect. I loved and adored them, and they loved and adored me in return. The only thing missing was the love of my life, Carla. I often thought about that love and how much she had meant to me over the years. God, I missed my wife, the woman who loved me. I cried frequently. Additionally, I used my connections to tap Steve Wilson's office and home phones. Yes, I know it was illegal, but what did it matter? What I uncovered was exactly what I had anticipated. Carla simply couldn't resist calling Steve to inform him that he was a father once more. "Hi, Steve, this is Carla." "What are you doing, Carla? You know you're not supposed to contact me. What if Don finds out?" "Oh, he won't find out, Steve. I'm using a payphone at the mall. There's no way he can trace my call. Sweetheart, I just wanted to let you know you're a father again, and she is adorable. Her name is Gracie. You make the most precious babies." "I'm glad she's adorable, Carla. When do you want to start working on the next one?" And he laughed. "You know I can't do that right now, Steve. Don and I haven't been intimate since he found out, so there's no way I could get pregnant now." "Wow, you must really want it then, huh? When do you want to get together?" "I do want it, Steve, and I would love to be with you, but I can't take the risk right now. I'm still hoping that one day Don will forgive me and we'll get our marriage back. After that, we can see if we can find a way to be together occasionally, though I doubt it will ever be the same as before. Don is much more suspicious now than he was back then." "Okay, Carla. Just know that I crave your hot body and will try to meet you anytime and anywhere you're available. Please stay in touch." "I will, Steve. Goodbye, sweetie. I love you." If you think that phone conversation hurt me or made me furious, you're mistaken. After everything she had done to me, there was nothing left of my heart that she could break. I was completely indifferent to Carla. To me, she was non-existent. All the love I once held in my heart for her had been redirected towards Stephen, Lori, and Gracie. They received all of it. There was nothing left for Carla. No matter what she did or could ever do, that love couldn't be restored. Had I not had an outlet for my love, everything might have turned out completely differently. I could have simply withered away and perished. I might have lost myself in alcohol or buried myself in work. I might have forgiven her and tried to mend our marriage. None of that occurred because I had my children to love and who loved me in return. I didn't need anything else or anyone else. A few months later, Steve Wilson tragically died in a car accident. Although no one actually saw the crash, it seems his vehicle veered off the road and collided with a tree. His neck reportedly snapped upon impact with the tree. He sustained a few other injuries, but the fatal cause was a broken neck. Carla learned about his death when she called his office number, and a stranger answered. I had kept the phone tapped for exactly that reason. Hello, this is Jonathan Davis. Oh, I was trying to reach Steve Wilson. I'm sorry, Steve Wilson no longer works here. May I ask who's calling? I'm just an old friend. I'll try to reach him at home. Miss, I understand this may be shocking, but Steve was killed in a car accident about 3 weeks ago. You should probably contact his family for more details. I'm very sorry to have to inform you. I heard her gasp as the shock took her breath away, and then the call ended. That night, when I returned home from work, Carla gave me a strange look. I didn't behave any differently, and she didn't mention anything. Later that night, I heard her crying again in her bedroom, and she continued for several nights afterward. Shortly after, she received a letter from the insurance company with a claim form for Steve's insurance benefits, listing the children as beneficiaries. She showed it to me and asked how to complete it. When the form was mailed, she looked at me oddly once more. She said, "You didn't seem shocked when you found out Steve had died." I replied, "Carla, I have no feelings for Steve right now, neither positive nor negative. I'm not shocked, nor do I care. What matters to me is that his children have the funds for their college education." She was clearly disturbed by my response and continued to give me that strange look. A week later, a check for $108,000 arrived as payment for the policy Steve had secured. Carla and I took the check to the bank and deposited the money into each of the children's college fund accounts. Each account received $46,000, along with some interest accrued from Steve's initial deposit. By the time Stephen began college, his fund would grow to approximately $80,000, Lori's to around $100,000, and Gracie's to about $130,000. This would significantly contribute to covering their educational expenses. On our drive back home, I remarked that at least the children's college funds were secured, and we wouldn't have to worry about the annual contributions. When we got home, Carla asked if we could have a conversation. I agreed. She inquired whether I could ever forgive her and love her again. I shook my head, saying no. She responded by calling me a cold-hearted son of a bitch. I admitted that she was probably right. She then questioned how I could be so unfeeling. I explained that I hadn't always been like this and believed it was her behavior towards me that had made me so hardened. I mentioned that I never felt this way with my children, and she acknowledged that she hadn't noticed it when I was with them either. Then she startled me by asking if I had any involvement in Steve's death. I was certain she had suspected it from the beginning. I nodded in affirmation. She pressed further, asking why. I informed her that I had been paying close attention to her interactions with him, both at work and at home, and had been observing their conversations. I mentioned that I was aware of everything she discussed about future plans, including her thoughts about not wanting to reunite just yet, but possibly considering it later when things had settled down. I made it clear that it was obvious there was no genuine love or respect for me, and that she had merely taken advantage of me all these years and would have continued to do so if she could. She asked me if I thought her life would change any time soon. I nodded. I told her it was only a matter of time. 2 months later, she grew tired of waiting and made her own decision to end things. I wept. I cried because Stephen and Lori cried. Their broken hearts shattered mine as well. I didn't grieve for Carla in the same way, as she had already distanced herself from me long ago when I first discovered the truth about our marriage. However, I wept because my children were hurting. She left me a letter, hidden in a place she knew only I would find. Dear Dawn, I'm deeply sorry. I was in love with Steve, but not in the same way I loved you. I loved you more than anything in the world. I understand that what I did shattered the love you had for me, and I can't bear living without it. I realize how much I hurt you and had hoped in time you could forgive me and we could find love again. I know I caused you pain and made you into someone you never wanted to be. When I learned what had happened between you and Steve, I knew our relationship would never be the same. I couldn't handle that reality. I will carry the guilt of ruining a good man for the rest of my days. Perhaps you weren't the perfect partner for me in the end. What I longed for was someone who could understand my conflicting feelings, someone who could accept that I needed love from both of you. I don't blame you for that. It's too much to ask of anyone. But that was my struggle. I couldn't let go of Steve's love, though I should have. I hope that my decision brings you some peace and allows you to move beyond the pain I caused. I hope that one day you'll release the anger and hurt you carry for me and Steve. I also wish that you can forgive yourself for the difficult choices you made along the way. I know the best parts of you are still there when you're with our children. I see the love in your eyes when you look at them, and it warms my heart to know they feel it too. When you look at them, I hope you can see a bit of me and love them even more because of it. I pray that one day, through your love for them, you'll find a way to love me again, even just a little. I'm so sorry, Dawn. Please forgive me for this last choice. I just couldn't bear it any longer. With love, Carla. This time, my tears were genuine. The monster had departed from me, just as she had hoped. I mourned the loss of a friend who would no longer share laughter or tears with me, the lover who would never embrace or love me again, and the mother of my children who would no longer be part of their lives, loves, marriages, grandchildren, successes, or failures. I wept for the emptiness in my heart left behind when the hate vanished. I had filled it with hatred to extinguish the love I felt for her, and now it was hollow. I cried for the life I had envisioned with Carla, knowing it could never be restored. Then I wept for my soul, realizing that my hatred had caused me to lose my humanity. I destroyed the letter. I went to the bank, removed all evidence of her infidelity, except for the DNA proof, from the safe deposit box, and destroyed it. No one would ever know about it unless a future medical necessity arose that required my children to learn that I wasn't their biological father. In my will, I directed that funds be placed in a medical trust and instructed the hiring of a medical trustee to oversee it. The DNA results were to be given to the trustee in a sealed envelope, to be opened only if any hereditary diseases were discovered. I was determined to do whatever it took to preserve Carla's memory in a positive and healthy way for her children and family. No one else needed to know what she had done. I never denied Carla's parents access to their grandchildren. They adored them and treated them well. I knew they blamed me for their daughter's death. I could see it in their eyes. But they wisely chose to move on. Perhaps they thought it was better to treat me kindly, knowing I might otherwise prevent them from seeing their grandchildren. I might not have acted that way, but I was grateful that they respected my space. Gradually, the emptiness in my heart began to be filled with the immense love I had for my children and fond memories of Carla. Despite everything that had happened, she had made me happy for 8 years, and I couldn't erase that. I no longer wanted to forget those times. Eventually, I even forgave myself. It took a long time, but it happened. I had 3 wonderful children who needed their father. I took a seat in the front row, observing as Stephen made his way across the stage to receive his high school diploma. The president of the school board handed him his certificate, smiled warmly, and embraced him tightly once he had it. Following him was her daughter, Jennifer, who also received her diploma and a hug. Jennifer was Stephen's girlfriend. They had been together since his first day of high school 4 years prior. My pride in Stephen was immense, and I couldn't help but feel that Carla would share the same sentiment. I remember having tears in my eyes as Stephen and Jennifer left the stage together, holding hands and appearing so mature. Both were set to head to Champaign in the fall to attend the University of Illinois, where they were sure to make a significant impact. Their deep love for each other was obvious to everyone, and it was clear they would eventually marry. I was confident that Carla would have also approved of Jennifer. Once the ceremony concluded, Stephen and Jennifer came down into the audience and embraced me tightly. My pride for them couldn't have been greater. They had both achieved high academic standings and were outstanding athletes, ensuring a bright future ahead. Stephen asked if it would be all right for him and Jennifer to attend a few graduation parties before returning home, and I gave my approval. Jennifer leaned in for another hug and said, "Thanks, Daddy. We'll see you and Mom later." As they walked away, I pondered her calling me Daddy. I had truly become her father figure. Leslie, her mother, and I had met just weeks after Stephen began high school. Leslie was the president of the school board and actively involved in the school's extracurricular activities. Stephen frequently spoke about Jennifer and her wonderful mother, leading us to meet at one of the football games. I felt like a teenager again, instantly captivated by her. I was probably stumbling over myself and might have looked and sounded foolish. I discovered that Leslie was a single mother. She had divorced when Jennifer was 9, and her ex-husband had cut all ties with the family. Jennifer never saw or heard from him. After chatting for a while, I invited her to have coffee after the game, and she agreed. From that point on, we spent a lot of time together, and a year later we got married. I love her deeply, and she loves me back. For a long time, I didn't believe I could ever be happily married again, but now I am. For the past 3 years, we've been a complete family. She cherishes Stephen, Lori, and Gracie as if they were her own children, and I love Jennifer like my own daughter. Ultimately, I realized long ago that biological parenthood isn't necessary to love a child. Leslie is fully aware of everything that happened with Steve and Carla. She knows all that I did during that period. I didn't want to keep any secrets from her if I was going to love her and spend my life with her. When I shared this with her, I noticed her expression change for a moment. She said she was surprised by my revelation but trusted that I was telling the truth, that the monster was gone for good. So she wasn't worried about our future. Our life together is wonderful. I have a new friend, a new lover, and a new partner for all my life dreams. My heart is filled with love for my new wife and our children, and there is also a small place for the good memories I had with Carla. Stephen is a handsome young man who somewhat resembles Carla, but as he grows older, he increasingly looks like my memory of his father. Lori and Gracie are miniature versions of their mother. They are beautiful and charming, and I see so much of Carla in them that I can't help but love her too for giving me these wonderful children. As they grew older, I shared as much as I could about their mother. I want them to know her as I once did, to love her the way I did, and to understand that she loved them dearly. Just then, Leslie approached me, interrupting my reflections on the past. She asked where Stephen and Jennifer were going. I told her they wanted to attend a couple of graduation parties before coming home. She smiled and said that if I hurried, I could take her home and start working on the baby I had promised her. We didn't take long to get to the car and head home. Life is good and keeps getting better,